Hey, what's going on, everybody? Manny here once again. Welcome to DFS Zone, your source for daily fantasy sport lineup advice for the NFL and the NBA. Got a brand new video for you guys this week. We're going to discuss this week's NFL slate, my top picks for the week. But before I get started, ladies and gentlemen, like always, I appreciate you guys drop a like on the video. And if you're new to the channel, first time here, never seen any of my NFL or NBA lineup advice videos, the only thing you have to do to become a part of the DFS Zone community, ladies and gentlemen, is subscribe down below. Make sure you put on that bell icon, turn that on. This way you don't miss out on any of my NFL or NBA lineup advice videos. All right, with that all out of the way, we are here. Another week of the NFL. And for those who have been following me, as you know, I've been doing NBA videos are pretty much almost every day. And like I said before, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I'm a one-man team. I do everything myself. So it's a lot of work with a family as well and a job and so on and so forth. So, bear with me. Last week I wasn't able to do an NFL video. I apologize for that. I am back this week. My videos are obviously for the NFL all going to be put together as one video. I was doing individual positions and giving you guys 2 or 3 plays, pretty much really 3 plays every single week. I'm not going to be doing that from this point on in. As you know, the last video I did 2 weeks ago, I was the first one that was just broken down only to the actual picks that I really like the best, that I wanted to share with my viewers. It's going to be that way throughout the rest of the NFL season. If you have any questions, anybody you think that I may be, now granted, I'm giving you one quarterback per position, one quarterback, one running back, so on and so forth. That does not mean that I do not have exposure to other players. Trust me, I do. If you want to be able to ask me any questions pertaining to that, you're thinking about throwing somebody out there, you want me to check them out a little bit more, want to get my input or my insight on that particular play, be more than happy. Don't be afraid whatsoever to reach out to me on Twitter. I will put down on Twitter or right here on the actual video comment section down below. You can ask me questions. I'll do everything I can to respond and give you back the best possible information I can give you. All right, so let's just dive right in, man. At quarterback this week, I'm going right to Mr. Drew Brees. I just love the matchup for Drew Brees. He's playing at home, and when he's at home, he is just really, really tough to deal with. The guy has been fantastic all year long. He's pretty much averaging 289 yards per game, 24 TDs, averaging 23 fantasy points per game. He's 8,500 on Fanduel. On DK, he's 6,500. Love everything about it. When I look at his home and away splits, at home, he's thrown 116 for 145, 80% completion percentage at home, 1,300 plus yards, 347.8 yards per game, averaging 11.1 yards per reception, per completion, 12 TDs, and he is, as you can see, he's over here. He's averaging 23.4 Fanduel points, but on DK he has 29 fantasy points per game there, obviously because of the 1 point per completion. So definitely remember that you got 2 different sites, different scoring for both sites. But I love him in both sites. He's just in a great matchup. Some of the other guys that are out there tomorrow are definitely in play as well, but I think he has the best matchup indoors as well. He don't have to worry about weather, being cold, being too hot, or having any rain or any snow. He doesn't have to worry about any of that tomorrow, and he's right at home where he's very, very dangerous. In the red zone, he's been very, very good. He's 4th best as far as the quarterbacks are concerned in the red zone, 48 of 68, completing 68% of his passes in the red zone, 299 yards and 16 TDs. And also inside the 10, he has been just as efficient, even more so, 73% completion percentage there, 22 of 30, 86 yards, and 12 TDs. So out of the 16 TDs he's had in the red zone, 12 of them have come in inside the 10-yard line. He's going up against Philly. Philly's 23rd in pass defense this year. They're giving up 266 yards per game, 7.2 yards per completion, 12 TDs. The receiving yards given up to receivers, which is important here because we're going to have some correlation with Mr. Drew Brees with one of his receivers. 25th in the NFL, something to also note, 285 yards per game, 11 yards per completion, 2 TDs, 2 receivers this year, and 12 touchdowns. They are also 10th in fantasy points per game allowed, 10th most actually, not just 10th in the league, 10th most, let me clarify that, giving up 20.8 DK and 19.7 Fanduel points to quarterbacks, and they're going up against a guy who's averaging over 23 fantasy points per game and 29 respectively on DK. So tough position for Philadelphia. Another thing also that I like about this game is Philadelphia is banged up in the secondary. So definitely Mr. Drew Brees should be able to just eat all day long, hitting Mr. Michael Thomas. In the red zone, as far as Philadelphia, they are the fourth best in the red zone as far as neutralizing opposing offenses. The offenses are averaging 44% conversion ratio in the red zone against them. So Philadelphia has done well there in stopping their opposition. Our opponents have been getting 3.5 opportunities in the red zone per game, and they're only scoring 1 touchdown in a field goal. But granted, they haven't faced New Orleans as of yet, and New Orleans happens to be probably one of the best, or probably I think they're the third best in the red zone offense as far as scoring. 73% of the time they're in the red zone, they converted into a touchdown. They have had 5 opportunities per game. 5 opportunities in the red zone. They are really getting downfield and getting in the red zone. 5 opportunities a game, and New Orleans is putting in 3 touchdowns and converting 3 touchdowns and a field goal. So definitely love the matchup. Drew Brees definitely in play for me as far as the stud quarterback. We go to running back, and at running back tomorrow, I definitely love Mr. Christian McCaffrey. 8,600 on Fanduel. He's 8,000 on DK. And as you can see, he's coming in 64 yards per game rushing, 8 TDs. Now remember, this is a dual threat back. I know that 64 yards don't look too great, but when you have 64 yards rushing and you're able to come over and convert 48 yards in receiving, you are totally, you'll have all-purpose yards of over 100 yards per game on average from Mr. Christian McCaffrey. And then we were concerned earlier in the year where he was not getting in the red zone and actually scoring touchdowns. Now he's actually scoring touchdowns. But 64 yards per game, 8 TDs, 19 fantasy points per game thus far here. He's also has 48 yards per game receiving, and that's 8.1 yards per rush. And then he also has 2 straight 30-plus games, which is very impressive. 30 here against Tampa Bay, and then against Pittsburgh, lit them up for 34 fantasy points. Had a really big game. Over the last 2 weeks, he's had over 22, anywhere between 19 to 22 touches per game over the course of the last 3 games. And on top of that, the most important thing, in the last 3 games, he has had 4 touchdowns rushing and 3 receiving, a total of 7 touchdowns in the last 3 games. So he has been on fire. Inside the red zone, he gets now some conversions. 19 of 39 inside the 20 with 4 TDs. Inside the 10, he has been just as good. 14 of 23, 14 carries, 23 yards with 3 touchdowns. Going up against Oakland. Oakland is the defense 30th in the league in defending the rush, giving up 141 yards per game and 9 touchdowns, 4.8 yards, pretty much almost 5 yards per rush. We got a young man here who's averaging 4.5, almost 5 rushes, 5 yards per rush. So right in line for him. As far as running backs, 7th most fantasy points per game versus running backs this year in the league. They're giving up 29.7 DK and 26.6 Fanduel. And here's a gentleman who's averaging 19 fantasy points per game here on Fanduel, and they're giving up 26.6. So he is in prime position to do very, very well here as far as converting fantasy points for us. In the red zone, Oakland, not too shabby. Oakland in the red zone as far as neutralizing offenses. 51% of the time, offenses have converted into touchdowns. Opposition has been having 3.5 opportunities per game in the red zone and only converting 2 touchdowns per game. But, again, they're going up against Carolina, and Carolina has done very, very well in the red zone. So I definitely like the whole matchup here. Matter of fact, let me just give you the Carolina. Yeah, Carolina in the red zone is 73.3%. They are the 3rd best in the NFL, folks. 3rd best. 73.3% of the time they get in the red zone, they score a touchdown. They're getting 3.5 opportunities a game and converting those into 2 touchdowns and a field goal. So Carolina and Mr. McCaffrey should be able to get some touchdowns. All right, Christian McCaffrey, my running back. We go to receiver. We have to have some correlation with Mr. Drew Brees, and obviously the top receiver of the week is Michael Thomas, but I cannot go without taking Mr. Thomas here with Mr. Brees. You just have to. 105.6 receiving yards per game, 7 touchdowns thus far this year, 19 fantasy points per game, 8,800 on both here and on DK. We take a look a little further on him, and I mean, he's been just absolutely incredible. Last 2 games, 8 targets, 15. Look at the conversion, 8 of 8 and 15, 12 of 15, 211 yards, a total of 281 yards over the last 2 weeks with 3 touchdowns. Look at the numbers, 23 and 33. That is way above his 19 fantasy points per game. So he's trending upward over the last 2 weeks. Him and Mr. Brees have been going nuts. He's had 50 targets over that span, 44 receptions, 138.7 yards per game, as you know, with 4 TDs. The last 2 games, he has had 23 targets and 20 receptions, 278 yards, like I mentioned, and 3 touchdowns. In the red zone, he is 4th best as far as the receivers are concerned. 20 targets, 17 receptions, 85% catch percentage for him, with 128 total yards and 6 touchdowns for Michael Thomas in the red zone. Inside the 10, 11 targets, 9 receptions, 40 yards, 5 TDs. So 5 out of his 6 touchdowns inside the 20 have come inside the 10. Going up against Philly, Philly's 25th in receiving yards allowed to receivers, 285 yards per game to wide receivers, 11 yards per catch, and 12 TDs. And we have a young man here who's averaging 12.7 yards per catch, so right in that neighborhood. Philadelphia has given up the 4th most fantasy points per game to receivers thus far this year, and it's probably going to get worse with their secondary banged up. They've given up 43.3 DK and 34.1 Fanduel fantasy points per game. In the red zone, they're 4th best, though. They're defended well in the red zone. Opponents only converting 44% of the time. Touchdowns, opponents have been getting 3.5 opportunities per game on them in the red zone and only allowing 1 touchdown and 1 field goal. But then again, like I said, in the red zone, as far as New Orleans is concerned, they're the 4th best in that department. 73% conversion ratio in the red zone. They get in there at least 5 opportunities per game and putting in 3 touchdowns and a field goal. So something's got to give. I think it's going to give in New Orleans' favor because Philadelphia, with that banged up secondary, I cannot see how they're going to be able to stop these 2 guys. All right, between Mr. Brees and Mr. Thomas. We go over to tight end. At tight end, I'm going to stick to Carolina and Greg Olson. First time I'm mentioning him this year. I told you earlier in the year that he is someone that, as soon as he gets back, will be one of Cam Newton's favorite targets, which he has been for the last few years. And, hey, tight end, man, it's tough to choose. I always tell you guys I always prefer to pay down a tight end. And it's tough to pay down a tight ends, man, so far this year, especially in the last few weeks, because there ain't really anybody down there that's getting more than enough targets that is worth actually taking a shot on. But Greg Olson is going to get some opportunities. As you can see, 6 targets in 2 straight games, 4 of 6 and 6 of 6 over the last 2 weeks, over 100 yards receiving. And in the last 4 weeks, he's had 3 touchdowns. He's had 2 13-point or more fantasy point games thus far this year. 13 here, 0.6 and 16.6. He's averaging 9. I'll take that any day. We come over here, and again, in the red zone, he has had 3 opportunities. He has caught all 3 passes for 29 yards and all 3 touchdowns. So he's been 100% solid in the red zone. Going up against Detroit. Detroit is 7th in pass defense, which they're not one. They're one of the better passing defenses. Only 229 yards per game against the opposition, but they are 7th. They're 16th in fantasy points allowed to tight ends thus far this year, allowing 12.4 DK and 10.3 Fanduel, which is slightly above what he is averaging. So it leads me to have that door. It opens up that door and that window there for him to hopefully get 10, maybe even 12 fantasy points, hopefully get a touchdown once again this week. In the red zone, 38 receptions thus far against Detroit by tight ends, 477 yards total with 4 touchdowns. In the red zone, they've given up 55% of the time the opponents have scored. So Detroit has done fairly well when they get inside the 20. Opponents have been having a hard time getting in. They have had 3.5 opportunities per game, and they've only allowed 1 touchdown and 1 field goal to the opposition. So they have done very well, Detroit, there. But Carolina coming in, like I said before, man, when I spoke about Mr. McCaffrey in the red zone, they are the 3rd best red zone offense in the NFL. 73.3% of the time they score a touchdown. They have had 3.5 opportunities per game on a regular basis. 2 TDs and a field goal is what they've been averaging in those 3.5 opportunities. So again, Carolina and Mr. Olson should do fairly well here. And as you can see, I took 2 New Orleans Saints and 2 Carolina Panthers. Then when we go to the defensively, I mean, any week you could go with anybody. I mean, to be totally honest with you, I mean, it's just not a whole lot of upside. As you can see, a lot of the teams are pretty much averaging about the same. But I'm coming down. As you can see, Tennessee Titans, I like Tennessee Titans. I like what they did last week. They shut down New England. But a couple of things. Most importantly, they've been only allowing 16 points per game to the opposition throughout the year. Granted, a couple of teams score in the 20s. And then you also have to look at, they're on the road, they're going into Indy, indoors. All right, I don't have a whole lot to go on as far as indoors, but as far as looking to see how well they've done on the road, we could look here against Dallas. They only gave up 14 in Dallas. They only gave the Chargers in Los Angeles only 20. In Buffalo, they shut down Buffalo to only 13. In Jacksonville, they shut down Jacksonville to only 6. And against Miami, they gave up 21 at the beginning of the year. But they're capable of getting some sacks. They're capable of getting some interceptions. They come in here 5th best in overall defense in the NFL, which is impressive. They're only 3,400, and on DK, they're only 2,500. They're also 10th. As you break down that defense, they're 10th in rushing defense, giving up only 99.8 yards per game, slightly under 100, 4 touchdowns. The 4 touchdowns is the 3rd best, it's the 3rd lowest touchdowns allowed in the NFL to opposing running backs. So they've done very, very well there. And what I also found impressive is they're 5th in pass defense this year, only giving up 228 yards per game, 11 touchdowns. And the 11 touchdowns is the fewest amount allowed to opposing quarterbacks and receivers thus far this year, 11 touchdowns. So overall, 15 touchdowns given up by this defense all year long. Sure, they don't get a lot of takeaways, and they don't get a lot of interceptions and fumbles. But nonetheless, they are still they seem to be pretty consistent as far as being tough to score on. All right, they held down New England last week, like I said, to 10 points. And in the last 2 weeks, I've also liked the factors that they held New England to 10 and Dallas to just 14. So, and the best 2 weeks in a while for them, 7 fantasy points last week and 10 the week before that. If they can get a couple, and what I like is they're going up against Indianapolis. Indianapolis has given up 9 interceptions this year, so there's some vulnerability and a possibility for them to get a little bit of pressure. Hopefully, put Mr. Luck in an uncomfortable position, and maybe you'll get a little fumble from him. Maybe you get an interception. If they can get 1 or 2 of those things, that will definitely help our fantasy point totals here. So I'm looking at that. So as far as the game is concerned, I just love the way Tennessee has been playing as a unit. They're very, very strong overall on both sides of the ball as far as rushing defense and passing defense. And those are some of the reasons why, as well as going up against Indy, where there's a possibility that maybe they just may rattle Andrew Luck to the point that they can get a turnover or 2 and possibly put up those additional fantasy points. And for only $3,400, I think they're one of the more sounder defensive units that have been playing well over the last 2 weeks. So with that, I say Tennessee Titans are a good play tomorrow. I do like a couple other teams, but to make the video short and quick and that I could focus on NBA as well, like I said, I'm basically going to give you what I think are the best possible plays this week. I hope you like the video, man. Drop a like on the video. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe down below. Make sure you put on your bell icon on, so this way you don't miss out on any of my NFL or NBA. NBA videos are pretty much every day. Anything 3-game slate or more, you're going to get a main video for the NBA. 2-game slates and 1-game slates, which is going to be very few during the course of the NBA season. But if there are any of those, there will be no videos for those. And then hopefully for the NFL, I'll continue to do the 1 video a week. Usually on Friday will probably be put out, or like today, Saturday, the day before. It helps me out because it also helps me be able to look to see what's available after injuries, after practices, and so on and so forth. So that's basically it. Again, good luck tomorrow on this NFL slate. And again, I'll see you guys for next week's NFL slate.